from the heart of Dubai, where tomorrow is being built today, to the world. Welcome to the CTO Show with Mehmet. Here, we redefine technology and reimagine possibilities. With Mehmet, delve into the riveting realms of AI, cybersecurity, and digital technology. Experience the thrilling highs and lows of startups. Immerse yourself in the spirit of entrepreneurship and witness the future of business innovation being written in real time. Now, without further ado, let's tune in and explore the future.
Hello and welcome back to a new episode of the CTO Show with Mehmet. Today, I'm very pleased joining me, Colm Nee. Colm, thank you very much for being with me here on the show today. The way I love to do it usually is I keep it to my guests to introduce themselves, to tell us a little bit about their background, their experience, and what you are currently up to. So the floor is yours.
Great. Well, thanks for having me, Mehmet. Really appreciate it. So I'm Colm. I'm the CTO of Enlighted. We're an IoT and sustainability company, headquartered in the Bay Area in California. We're actually a Siemens company. So we're part of Siemens Smart Infrastructure Division. I'm passionate. So my background is really about, using machine learning to solve hard problems that exist in the world. And so I try and use this also in my role at Enlighted. We're very much focused on making the buildings where our system is installed as energy efficient as possible, and really giving building occupants the power to really understand, how the building is being used so that you can make operational improvements. So sustainability is everything for us. And I'm very, very excited to be on the show as well.
Fantastic. Same here also, Colin, because again, this is two topics that are close to my heart, mainly like anything related to sustainability, of course, and IoT, AI, and all this. And starting from there, we are seeing a lot of innovations in that domain. So how are, AI and IoT innovations in European transforming the way, let's start with the commercial buildings operate in terms of sustainability and occupant experience. And, that would be great if you can shed some light on some examples of some successful implementations.
Yeah. So I think it's difficult to talk about buildings and AI without first talking about the challenges. So commercial buildings do have challenges with data. And so I kind of like to use the snowflake analogy, because buildings are in many ways like snowflakes. And what I mean by that is, each building is different. So there's really no standardization of how buildings exchange data. There are some standards on interoperability, but it's not common, for your average building to really see these implemented well. And, sometimes there's even a lack of alignment on incentives. So simple question, who pays to create a digital twin for the building so that various applications which are working to operate the building can even speak a common language? The good news is that there's a lot of innovation going into this space. There's a lot of startups in this space at the moment. So my hope is, 5 years from now, we're looking at this as really being a fork in the road moment for buildings and AI. And when I think about this problem, I really think about potentially using AI to really to really make a building smart. So a very simple example, if you're a lighting system or a HVAC system working on a building, how do you know what a conference room is? How do you know what that conference room is used for? How do you know about the other assets in the building? All of this is relevant for solving data problems with buildings. And so I really think about AI as potentially helping us to create the digital twin. I think another big use case is really on, pattern recognition. So, a lot of things that happen in buildings can be identified by machines, including problems. So using AI for smart maintenance and predictive maintenance identification is one that we see a lot of. In terms of successful implementations, Enlighted has an app called the Connect app. And, originally back when Enlighted wasn't owned by Siemens, the initial version of this app was really designed to democratize building controls for the occupants. So one of the biggest problems that facility managers have is hot cold calls. So a hot cold call is basically what it sounds like. Someone will ring up and say, hey, this room is too hot. This room is too cold. I'm having to wear a sweater. Can you please adjust the temperature? And so I'm not going to assume you know much about how heating happens in a building, but basically, buildings have set points for each zone where there's a temperature control. So there's a cooling set point and a heating set point. And the cooling set point says, hey, if the temperature gets too hot, let's cool the building because it's not going to be comfortable. And by the same extension, if a building gets too cold, so if it goes below the heating set point, then we need to heat the building. And so the dead band is the difference between these two things, the heating set point and the cooling set point. And so if you think about it from an energy perspective, a wider dead band is actually better for energy consumption because you're being more conservative on when you choose to heat and cool the building. And so it's also better for the environment. But that comes with a trade-off, and that trade-off is comfort. So, what we had done is we developed a product that basically allowed building occupants to vote. So essentially it democratized building comfort. And what that meant was, if you put an application in the hands of the building occupant and let them say, instead of calling up a facility manager, let them actually vote in the app on whether they're too hot or too cold, we could then use machine learning to decide not only when to heat and cool, but also to adjust the set points. And actually what we found was pretty interesting. So what we found was by giving people control, you could widen the dead band. So essentially you could increase the scope of acceptable temperatures for the building occupant because they felt empowered and because they had control. And so as a result, we were not only able to increase the perception of comfort in the building, but we're also able to save energy for the building owner. And of course, when we're saving energy in a building, we're also talking about it being better for the environment and having less carbon emissions.
This is really fascinating, Colm. And I'm thinking about it, from different perspective. And I think all this is possible because also of the advancements that happened with, of course, AI working in the back end, and the IoT being in the front of in form of sensors, and but the idea of digital twin, and this is something that just came out to my mind now. Is it something to simulate like different scenarios, just for me to understand, and maybe the audiences? So is it like something to be able to simulate also different scenarios, and even maybe we can take kind of a extreme scenario and a, let's say, median scenario, and then compare how things would looks like? Is it like, did I understand it right?
Yeah, I mean, you can use a digital twin for this. It's always best to do this in a design phase. So when you're designing a building, a lot of the decisions that are taken, are fixed because once a building exists, it's very hard to change something. And so, a lot of effort goes in, and this is something actually that Siemens is pretty big into, is really designing a building and a system so that it's very efficient and so that it's comfortable. And so, but that's a little bit different to the problem I'm describing. So the problem I'm describing is, and this is going to sound really basic. So, let's assume you have a lighting system that has sensors in it. And these sensors can detect when there's people in the room or there's people in a certain space. How can these sensors, which collect that data, share their information on state, so on whether a room is occupied, with another system. And as an example, the system that heats or cools that space. So you would think this should be a pretty easy problem to solve. And unfortunately, due to just how the construction industry works, the alignment of incentives, the lack of interoperability standards, this is often very different from building to building. So it does happen. But if you look at a portfolio of buildings, sometimes even owned and operated by the same organization, you will see different systems, different standards, and you won't see this kind of data layer concept in all of those buildings. So I'm talking real basics here. We're not talking about simulation. We're just talking about sharing stake on what is happening inside the building. And of course, it's difficult to talk about energy efficiency without talking about building occupants. So energy efficiency of a building will be determined by how the building is occupied. So it's, we're solving some pretty basic problems here.
I got you. So talking about, AI, and again, there's a debate, I think, and, there's a lot of thoughts about it between balancing AI growth and sustainability, because everything we're talking about, it touches sustainability, right? So the rise of AI, driving an increased demand for, compute power and of course, like data center space and all this. How do you think, from a CTO standpoint of view, we can balance the need of this computational power with the sustainability goals?
Yeah, that's a really good question. First of all, I think we just need to acknowledge, the point of the question and allow that to soak for a little bit, because as a CTO or as a technology leader, your decisions result directly in operational carbon emissions, and thus they also contribute to climate change. So it's actually in many ways not so different from the decisions we take in our private lives around how we get to work, how and when we travel to faraway places, or how we consume goods. And as a CTO or a technology leader, you have this added burden. And so, I read recently that it was in the news that some big tech companies consume as much electricity as some fairly large countries. So I just remember this one example that, two of the big cloud providers consume more electricity than Iceland, for example. But when you think about it, it's actually not that big tech is consuming electricity. It's organizations like the ones that we work in. And by extension, the products of B2B and B2C technology companies. And so, I think the question it goes beyond what a CTO is typically got in their scope, but the question is, really, what do we do about this? And for me, as society, it really starts with transparency. And so the good news is, there are laws coming into force in many places that will force companies to report on their operational carbon emissions. And so, in case you're not aware, these are broken down into scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions. And so these are categories defined by the greenhouse gas protocol, and to help companies measure and manage their greenhouse gas emissions. And so, scope 1 emissions are direct emissions from sources that are owned or controlled by the company. And so this is stuff like, emissions from combustion in boilers, in furnaces, in vehicles that the company owns. And then you have scope 2 emissions that are indirect emissions from the generation of electricity. And so these emissions typically occur at the facility where the energy is produced. So, by the grid, and not where it's consumed. And so this includes stuff like, steam, heating, cooling. And so when you think about data centers and cloud compute more generally, a certain amount of scope 2 emissions could come from data centers. So if you're an organization that is renting your own data center space, you will need to report that energy consumption as part of your scope 2 emissions. And then scope 3 emissions is basically all other indirect emissions that occur in the value chain of the company. So, and it doesn't include the stuff in scope 2. So this is stuff like, business travel and employee commuting. It's emissions from the production and transportation of goods that you've purchased. It includes, use of sold products, and end of life treatment of sold products. So it's a really comprehensive framework. So now if you think about cloud compute, even if you're using, one of the big cloud providers, you will be forced as a company to account for this in your scope 3 emissions. And so again, this is going to be law. And by the way, it's a good thing, because you can only improve what you can measure, a wise person once said. And then as a society, we need to figure out, who pays for these emissions. Does a company need to offset whatever they can't get to with the use of renewables? Many companies have carbon neutrality goals and want to be effectively carbon net neutral by some of them 2030, by most 2050. And, there are some pretty big questions in this, like, how can we decarbonize the grid? But, getting back to your question, on the supply side, or the demand side, I guess, in this case, is where CTOs and tech leaders will have more control. And so let's think about that briefly. When it comes to sustainability, I really equate it using cloud compute and storage to something like flying on a commercial plane. It's bad for the environment, but you have little control on how it's powered. And it's probably going to exist even if you don't use it. So I try and take a similar approach to what I take when I'm deciding whether or not to fly anywhere, which is, only consume what you need. And then I think a unique thing with computation is design the computational workloads to fit the problem. There are when you're thinking about AI, certain scaling laws. And so if you don't have much data, don't try and develop this huge complex model. Don't overfit your models to the data, basically. And that means you won't be spending more on compute than you need. And then I think you need to track what you spend. You need to exhibit cost control, but also, by extension, carbon footprint control. So I think there's a certain amount leaders can do, but undoubtedly this is a massive problem for society and a very complex one.
Very, very enlightening, Colm. But just I'm thinking about like this whole, concept that you mentioned. Do you think all CTOs or all technology leaders are aware and they are ready for that, or like it's a work in progress?
Well, I think when it comes to the reporting, probably not, because, most realistically, for most of us, it's going to be about using a public cloud and about cloud compute, right? And this is scope 3 emissions. Scope 3 emissions are notoriously hard to report on, because what you actually need is you need one of the big cloud providers to tell you how the energy generation is happening. And then you need to report on this. So I do anticipate, especially with scope 3 emissions and the laws around them, a little bit of slack to be cut by governments. And I'm sure there's some very intense lobbying happening in this direction because, it is complex. But I think it will come. And as a result, we will need to know about it as technology leaders. And of course, we'll be asked. So if taking my organization as an example, if we did need to do this kind of reporting, I would fully expect to be asked, hey, Colm, how many carbon emissions are we using by using cloud? I think the easy thing to do really is just to question how your people are really using cloud. What I see a lot of, and we've gotten a lot better on managing it, but a lot of the time, a developer will spin up a resource. So like either a server or, some compute, and then they'll forget about it, right? So we'll continue paying for it, and it will continue being used. So it will continue drawing energy. And so what we've tried to do is, for selfish reasons, because it's about reducing cost, but it has a positive impact on the environment. We try and now scale our operations so that even if someone does forget that they're not using a certain resource, that it's not a problem for the company. And we're not, so we have like auto deletion policies, etc., on resources in our research and development environments. So, you can do small things as well. And, we're not going to solve this problem as individuals, but, every little helps.
Absolutely. Like, so this is, I think, one of the challenges, Colm, when it comes to sustainability. Like, what do you think other challenges, technology leaders would be facing to implement like sustainable practices across the board? Like, not only necessarily to this cloud, thing, but across the board. So, what do you think?
Yeah.
They will be, challenges will be facing.
I think it depends a little bit, what industry you're in. If you're a SaaS provider, most of your footprint is going to come from cloud compute. I think if you offer a physical product, so if you've got hardware, you have a different set of challenges because, there's more than we think a lot about climate change and about carbon emissions because of the, change in weather, but there's a lot of issues around how we're consuming resources in our planet and what this is doing to the planet. So, even stuff like recycling of products at the end of life and helping your customers recycle, by accepting that material back and then reusing this when you develop new generations of your product. There's just a whole world to be explored there. It's referred to sometimes as the circular economy. And so, especially in Europe, there's a lot of laws that will exist around, reusage of materials. And, we're lucky to be part of Siemens, who is really forward thinking on this. And so, we recently announced at Siemens, a policy on how we want to, develop products that then every business unit is going to adhere to. So unfortunately, with time, it feels like, the world gets more complex and you have more things to think about. But, when it comes to the environment, those are the big challenges. And I think, sometimes people also underestimate the societal aspect of sustainability. So I spend a lot of time thinking about how to make the development in my team be more sustainable. So how do I, create an environment where the team gets up every day and thinks, hey, I'm excited to get to work. I'm motivated. I know what I'm doing. I know why I'm doing it. And, the company's working for me. It's not working against me. And so, I think if you cast a broad enough net around sustainability, there's something in there for everyone to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, one of the questions I wanted to ask you, like, and this is maybe I'm gonna bring it before, the one I was planning to ask you, which is, from leadership perspective. So, how as a CTO, for example, you can motivate, your teams to, focus on the sustainability, and of course, like, because it's all about innovation also as well. So, what the strategies you found the most effective to do so?
So I do think there's working sustainably and then there's working on sustainability. And these are probably two different things. For me, it's really about building products in a way that, so, let's think about working sustainably first, because you can't really work on sustainability unless you're working sustainably as a team. And for me, it's really about building products in a way that keeps the teams happy with their work and performing at a high level and taking pride in their work as well. And so, I tried to build teams that are autonomous and empowered. And then by doing that, they tell me what to do, not the other way around. So I spend a lot of time as a leader, focusing on team composition. Do we have the right mix of skills? Do we have the right diversity in the team? How's the morale of the team? Are we removing blockers? So if there are challenges that the team are having, are we really working to remove these? We also like to understand, what's working, what's not working. And so we always do retrospectives, and I try not to join these because I find that if I join these, sometimes it influences what people talk about. But I always like to read, the reports from the retrospectives and see, how can we be better next time? And then when I think about, working on sustainability, I think it goes really to not extending beyond your means. So whether it's using, compute that you don't need, or spending money that you don't have on things that really aren't particularly useful. I think these things are all important. And then I think when it comes to, if you're lucky enough to work on a product that has a real difference in sustainability, then great, keep doing that. And I think if you're not, and, maybe you're at the point in your career that you're considering a change, I would encourage everyone to join the revolution. It's still early, but there are really so many interesting areas now to sustainability. I mean, green tech is just booming. So whether it's, decarbonization of the grid, whether it's researching and productizing renewable energy alternatives, whether it's the energy efficiency of the actual infrastructure, which is an area that we're involved in, or whether it's, speaking about, carbon emissions, carbon accounting software, it also has a really important role to play in sustainability. And, if saving the planet isn't a motivating problem, then I really don't know what is. So it's a really exciting time to be working in sustainability.
Absolutely. Now, one thing, I'm curious about it, Colm, which is, for you did a transition from, financial services before you joined Enlighted. So what was the motivation? Like, can I say what you just mentioned at the end now? Is it like the main motivation for you to change? And how is the experience of changing the industry, for a CTO? Like, how easy, how challenging is it?
Yeah, so maybe let's start with, because I used to work in financial services, as you said. And, I really think that financial services is tremendously important. So financial education is something that we simply don't get in schools, which is a real shame. I'm not really sure why. But, we tend to rely on our parents to give us our financial education, who tend to set either a good or a bad example, when it comes to managing money. And so I had the opportunity to work for a company that was, amongst other things, advising pension funds on how to invest their money on behalf of those who might not be experts on this topic. And so, I really enjoyed this time. The financial markets are very dynamic. They're very exciting. When you're working in them, they kind of feel alive. They're constantly changing. And there are things that are true today that might not be true tomorrow in financial markets. But I think there are really two things that motivated my change. One was I actually wanted to get closer to the customer. So, I never really got to see the healthcare worker who was able to retire a couple of years earlier because of the investments that our clients made on their behalf. And, I wanted to see a different industry. I'm an explorer by nature. I really truly believe that variety is the spice of life. I love to learn new things, and what better way to do that than by changing industries? And at the time I was actually doing an MBA, and I think one of the for me, doing an MBA as more of having an engineering background was a really transformative experience because, I used to think about my development as something like, an engineer, an analytical thinker. I used to think, well, I've created a certain expertise for myself. And if I change industry, I'm going to be losing all of that. And I think what the MBA taught me was that that's actually not true. And that I could do anything I put my mind to. So I think I use the MBA as a way of changing industry as well. And, the reason I chose Enlighted and Siemens for this change was because I fell in love with the concept. So, you can invest in this smart IoT system, which not only saves you a tremendous amount of energy, but it can also tell you things about the building and what occupants are doing that are not otherwise possible. So to be honest, I kind of fell in love with this idea and I'm still in love with it today. The challenges from changing an industry, you learn so much. So I think when you're working in a certain industry for a long time, you develop a pattern of thinking that can become a bit fixed. So you just see things in a certain way. And so, I basically had to relearn everything from scratch. And so there were times where I felt, really out of my depth. But for me, it was an incredibly enriching experience to change industry. And I would encourage everyone to do it. And I think there are ways of doing it that where you don't necessarily change industry, but you can change roles. So, we have people that go from being engineers to product managers, and they can make amazing product managers because they can challenge the engineering team. On one hand, they kind of have this mental map in their head of complexity, what's easily possible, what's less possible, and they can use that to their advantage. So I think even within the industry, there are moves you can make to really, really enrich your experience.
Absolutely. And I can, I can second that because I have like similar experience, changing roles, going out of comfort zone, shifting from a role where I don't see, anything outside of my cubicle, I would say, to a role where I'm every day somewhere in someone else's office. So, really these experiences shape even, our personalities, and it opened and widened our vision and the way we want to do things. And I can see, Colm, the passion you have for solving a real problem, which is everyone's problem. And it's good. Like recently we start to see, the terms ESG and, sustainability and clean tech and all these things, on everyone's agenda today. And we need, I think, more people like yourself who are like motivated and passionate about solving these real problems. Now, beside, what you're working on and what you do at Enlighted, so what like other, I would say, intersection of the technologies that are getting you the most excited? Is it like a intersection of all these technologies together, which is kind of a cliche, I know, or is it something like next generation? I don't know, robots or bots. I don't know how we should call them, that can work on these smart IoT platforms. What are like the things that are exciting you and you are seeing them coming in the near future?
Yeah, really good question. It's quite an exciting time to be alive with everything that's happening. I think thinking about the intersection between AI and IoT, which is something we spend a lot of time thinking about. One thing I'm really excited about is environmental monitoring. And there are many different, use cases for environmental monitoring. One that we think a lot about at Enlighted is energy efficiency. So, in a smart building, if you understand with high granularity the environmental conditions, you can understand better where you might have issues with energy efficiency or faulty equipment. And so that's definitely a big one. But then, just going a little bit further, if you look at how energy is generated, the smart grids. So AI and IoT, when put together, really contribute to the optimizing the energy distribution based on real-time demand and supply data. And so this reduces energy waste and enhances the integration of renewable energy sources, which is one of the biggest challenges with decarbonizing the grid, is the fact that, a lot of renewables can't just be turned on like you can fire up a gas turbine. And I think, on energy efficiency, there's another big one around, renewable energy optimization. So IoT can really help you monitor environmental conditions so that you can optimize the positioning of solar panels and wind turbines. And so you're really maximizing energy production. And, there are other use cases for environmental monitoring on like air and water quality. Precision agriculture is another big one. So, how can you really monitor in real time soil conditions, crop health, and weather patterns, so that you can do, precise irrigation and precise fertilization. And I think, on the technology side, so the question is, okay, well, why is this easier now? Why is it changing? I think it's really never been easier to implement AI and IoT in your product. So, we tried this recently. You can host a recurrent neural network, so an LSTM type model on a microcontroller with something like TensorFlow Lite. And this will help create a ton of real-time monitoring use cases, which have, ultra low latency, fault tolerance, because you're doing that computation at the edge, so close to the problem, and, which generate a low number of false positives and false negatives, across a bunch of industries. So, that intersection is particularly exciting. And then, with the advancement of battery life performance, the form factors for sensors are becoming smaller and smaller and cheaper and cheaper. And so, I think we're at a point now where IoT is ready to go mainstream. And then I think, the other big trend I'm excited about, it's not really an intersection, but it's really firmly in the AI domain, is I really think we're at the start of the era of AI agents. So, autonomous compute engines that can perform, moderately complex tasks. And I think it's clear that this will transform industries, like every industry, especially those that have a high complexity in software development. And so one of the big, VCs in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is where I live, I was reading an article that they were saying that, in the world that we're living, software is actually becoming labor. So they have this equation which says, capital buys coffee, it buys engineers, and it buys GPUs. And out of this comes code that takes the role of labor. And, whether you believe it, the timing for this is now, or whether it's still off in the future, even if that's close to being true, I think it's equal parts, exciting and terrifying. But if you think about industrial processes, I spoke about the problems that we have in smart buildings with normalization of data. The problems around data that AI can help with are really specific to the industries. And sometimes they're specific to the companies who have the problems. And so I think the great promise of AI agents will be, it will allow us to solve these problems at an order of magnitude, more speed and more ease. It will make these problems a lot easier to solve, because right now, you would need to throw a team of 5 people at a really specific problem in a really specific industry. Whereas if an AI agent can help you, pre-integrate, pre-normalize all the data, and then even apply a model to get a certain outcome, I mean, that's a really exciting possibility.
Indeed, exciting times, and I'm a big believer in the AI agents approach across all industries, because I read like a couple of papers since last year and the year before, actually. By the time actually ChatGPT appeared and all this, and to your point, like it looks like, so we're gonna have the agents working for us in form of software or code, which really excites me also as well, because if you, I think even about the simple processes or tasks that if I think an agent can do to me, and then I give just what I want, the end goal, and then it goes and categorize the task that it has to do, and even it can actually utilize other agents to complete some tasks. So this is really fascinating to me. People thinks that I'm with you, Colm. I think it's now, it's not like something futuristic, because I've seen kind of proof of concepts for few things in the past few months, which is like really blown my mind across different industries, whether it's like in retail tech, I've seen in construction, in different domains, which is really fascinating. So Colm, almost will come to an end. Finally, maybe words you want to share with fellow CTOs, and where people can find more about you and connect with you.
Yeah, final thoughts. I mean, I don't have all the answers, right? I have my experiences, but, I found that having values is really important for your leadership. So it's surprising sometimes how easy it is for my teams to tell when I'm passionate about something and maybe when I'm going through the motions. And so, when reflecting on sustainability, it needs to come from the heart. And so, we can always borrow examples from our private life. I recently was lucky enough to have my first child with my wife. I have a daughter who turns 1 next week. And I think this has really changed my outlook as well, because, when you have I think anyone can care about sustainability and around leaving the planet in a good shape for the next generation. But when you actually have a child, that's when things really come home to you, because you start thinking about the life that they're going to have. So that would be my advice for people is, have those core set of values, which are true to you and which everyone should know you by, and try not to deviate from them. People can connect with me on LinkedIn. I live in California and in the San Francisco Bay Area. So I'd be happy to get to know some people that are part of the community, other CTOs, other technology leaders, or especially founders, and hear, what you're working on. And very open to that.
Great. Thank you very much, Colm, for, sharing your experience, and for being also not only, sharing the technology aspect, also the human aspect, which is, I really appreciate it. And to your point, like the whole thing, what we try to do, at least I'm talking about myself also now, is how we can, use our experiences to leave the planet better than the way we found it. And, to your point, think about the future in a way that is livable. Our kids can survive it, and make sure that they have, an easy life, better than the one maybe that we had. So I really appreciate this, Colm, and being so transparent on that also as well. And, I'm gonna put the LinkedIn profile link in the show notes, so they can connect with you. And again, this is how I end my episodes. This is for the audience. I really appreciate your feedback on this episode. And if you just discovered this podcast by luck, thank you for passing by. I hope you enjoyed it. Please give us a thumb up and subscribe, and share it with your friends and colleagues. And if you are one of the people who keep following me, thank you for doing so and sending me your suggestions and comments. I read all of them. Keep them coming. And as I say always, thank you for tuning in. We'll meet again very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hit that subscribe button. Share the show with your tech-savvy friends and fellow entrepreneurs. And leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. Your support means the world to us.